Lieutenant Risa Calder. Lieutenant Risa Calder, the 13-second lag. The tactical dome of Temple Mount had been built to humble certainty. Everything about it denied comfort. The chamber was vast enough to dwarf a formation of gunships, yet its curved walls and recessed lighting created the opposite sensation, as if the space were closing in on anyone unprepared to think clearly under pressure. The floor vibrated with the low, ceaseless hum of the simulation lattice, a resonance that carried through boots, bone, and breath, a reminder that nothing within the dome was ever truly still. Lieutenant Candidate Risa Calder stood at the center console with her hands resting lightly on the interface, her gaze fixed on the dormant holotable before her. At 17 standard years old, she had spent more than half her life inside the Order. And unlike many of the cadets around her, she had long since learned that stillness was not the absence of movement, but the mastery of it. She did not fidget, did not shift her weight, did not allow the tension in the room to surface in any visible way. Around her, others waited with varying degrees of composure, some rigid with anticipation, others masking unease behind practiced discipline. But to Risa, their restraint was only partial. She could feel it in them, subtle as heat rising from an engine casing. The instructor made a slow, deliberate circuit around the holotable before stopping opposite her. He did not speak at first because final-year cadets were expected to recognize pressure when it entered the room. When he gave the signal, the dormant table ignited. The display surged to life in a wash of red and gold projections. Enemy icons bloomed across the grid, resolving into a Jakari rating formation advancing through a meridian corridor. Suppression fields unfolded in overlapping arcs, bending sensor lines and distorting targeting solutions, while patrol vectors shifted in layered patterns that seemed almost alive. To most of the cadets, it was chaos structured by data. To Risa, it was something else entirely. Her throat crest vibrated with a faint internal hum as the golden bioluminescent lines beneath her jade-green skin flickered along her neck and forearms. The information did not arrive to her as images alone. It translated as pressure, rhythm, and distortion. A field she could feel pressing against her senses like the air before a storm. The instructor's voice broke the silence. Meridian corridor engagement. You are outnumbered, outpositioned, and behind on telemetry. Solve it. The timer began, and cadets moved immediately, issuing commands and projecting solutions, voices overlapping as tactical projections shifted in rapid succession, the sharp scent of heated circuitry rising as consoles overloaded under competing inputs. But Risa remained still, feeling the vibration of the deck deepen beneath her boots as if the system itself were straining, watching, and, more importantly, listening, not with her ears, but with the heightened awareness that had defined her training since childhood. As the suppression fields cycled every 9 minutes on paper, their transitions imperfect, with a delay subtle enough to escape notice unless one was attuned to the instability beneath the system's surface. Around her, she could sense the others rushing, forcing solutions, reacting instead of understanding. And for a brief moment, she felt the familiar pressure in her chest, not fear, but the memory of being too late once before, of counting ships that never returned. She counted the interval silently, tracking the moment where the harmonic pressure thinned along the port flank. When she was certain, she spoke. There's a 13-second lag on the port flank. The room went quiet. The instructor regarded her. Explain. Risa marked the distortion node with a measured gesture. If we ghost a frigate-sized element through this seam at Mark 7, their sensors will register a phantom echo and commit tracking resources to the wrong vector. The echo will hold long enough to slip the formation and strike the carrier from the rear. Risk? Minimal if executed cleanly, she replied. Catastrophic if not. The simulation ran her solution. The ghosted element slipped through the distortion exactly as predicted, the Jakari sensors locking onto the false return while the real strike vector cut behind them. The carrier was eliminated in a clean, decisive hit. The display froze on victory, the red and gold projections locking into a crystalline stillness, as if the battlefield itself had been arrested mid-breath. Residual heat signatures bled off the shattered carrier icon in slow, fading halos, while the suppression arcs that had moments before writhed across the grid now hung inert, their geometry exposed and harmless. Around the table, the cadets did not move at first. A few stared at the frozen outcome with narrowed eyes, recalculating what they had just witnessed. Others shifting almost imperceptibly as the tension drained from their posture in controlled increments. One exhaled quietly through his nose, another's hand hovered over a console he no longer needed to touch. The instructor remained perfectly still, but the subtle tightening along the ridges of his jaw betrayed his assessment, his gaze moving from the display to Risa with a precision that suggested he was no longer evaluating the scenario, but her. The instructor studied her in silence before finally saying, his tone less formal now, edged with something closer to curiosity than authority. "You felt it." "Yes, sir," she answered. Then after the briefest pause added, almost without thinking, "It wasn't hiding." He nodded once. "You're cleared for field assignment, Calder. Report to the Temple's shield at the end of the cycle." "Understood, sir." That night, the barracks were quiet in the disciplined way only military spaces ever were. But as Risa stepped away from the tactical dome, the echo of the simulation lingered in her mind, not as victory, but as confirmation. The 13-second lag had not been luck, and that realization carried weight, because it meant she was no longer training for possibility, but for inevitability. Risa sat on the edge of her bunk, a thin silver thread resting in her hands, the last piece of her mother's flight suit. She traced it once, then looked toward the viewport slit where distant stars burned cold against the darkness. "The sky remembers every name it loses," she whispered. Then, closing her hand around the thread, she added, "I intend to make sure it remembers the ones we refuse to give it." The memory of Adrian always began with color, not fire, not screaming, not collapse, but violet. That was what she remembered first whenever the past returned uninvited. The violet of the upper atmosphere above the sky cities, luminous and serene in the hour before evening. Even now, years later, after war had given her 100 more terrible images to sort and suppress, that color remained fixed in her mind, with painful clarity. She had been 8 years old when the sky changed. The observation deck trembled beneath her small feet as the first bombardment trails cut across the horizon. The air filled with the scent of burning alloy and scorched insulation, and the sky cities below were not collapsing. They were being dismantled with precision. Even then, she felt the pattern behind it. Her mother knelt before her, hands steady despite the chaos. "The sky remembers every name it loses, little wing," she said. "Make sure it remembers ours with pride." Risa nodded, though she did not understand, her fingers closing reflexively around the silver thread as her mother pressed it into her palm. She felt the warmth of that touch linger even as it slipped away. For a heartbeat, she reached after her, a small, instinctive motion that never became a step, her throat tightening as if a word might form, and then failing to come. Lyra did not look back. She was already running, already part of the line of pilots who chose the sky over the ground, and Risa was left at the rail with her mouth slightly open, her eyes fixed on the figure she refused to lose sight of until the distance swallowed her whole. She began to count as the launches ignited, her gaze tracking each ascent with desperate precision, 100 ships rising into the burning sky, contrails cutting through smoke and fire until the numbers thinned and the formation broke, until only 12 escaped the horizon. And she was still counting because stopping meant admitting what she already knew. Her mother was not among them. Her grip tightened until the thread bit into her skin, her knuckles paling, her breathing shallow but controlled. She did not cry because the feeling building in her chest did not know how to become tears. And in its place, something colder settled in, something that stilled her completely, as if a part of her had chosen silence over breaking. They did not take her gently. The convoy had barely cleared the last burning ridge when the sky split again, and a black and gold dropship punched through the smoke, its engines howling against the pressure of a dying atmosphere. The ramp slammed down before the vehicle had even come to a full stop, and armored figures surged forward with brutal efficiency, no shouted reassurances, no wasted motion, only hands pulling, lifting, triaging. Raisa felt herself dragged up and out of the crush of bodies, the hot metal of the transport floor replaced by the colder, vibrating plating of the dropship ramp. The air inside was sharp with ozone and hydraulic fluid, the roar of engines shaking her bones as she was guided, then firmly placed into a restraint harness. For a heartbeat, everything blurred. The smell of smoke in her hair, the heat still clinging to her skin, the distant collapse of another sky spire echoing like thunder. A figure knelt in front of her as the ramp began to rise. His armor was marked differently from the others, scored, battle-worn, carrying the quiet authority of someone who did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. When his visor lifted slightly, she saw his eyes, steady, focused, not frantic like the others around him. Even at 8 years old, she noticed the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, as if nothing in the chaos outside could rush him. "Hold still," he said, his voice calm, almost quiet compared to the violence surrounding them. He tightened the harness across her shoulders with practiced precision, checking the locks twice without looking, his attention already shifting to the rest of the bay. Then, just for a second, he met her eyes again. "You're not done yet. Stay with me." The words embedded themselves somewhere deeper than understanding, settling into her like a command that did not require explanation. Even as the ramp sealed and the engines built to a thunderous roar, as the noise dulled and the heat began to fade behind the hull, she found herself repeating it silently, not in panic, but in rhythm, anchoring herself to something she could not yet name. The words were simple, but they carried something heavier than reassurance, something that felt like certainty as movement shifted behind him. A second figure slid past like a shadow given form, her armor matte and segmented, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. She didn't speak. She raised 2 fingers in a quick, precise signal, clean, efficient, final. Even in her panic, Raisa understood it meant something important. The others responded immediately, adjusting positions without hesitation. "Perimeter clear," the woman said, her voice low and controlled. 30 seconds. Another voice followed, deeper, heavier, edged with something that almost sounded like calm amusement despite the situation. "Then let's not waste the Lord's time standing in the fire." The man who spoke was larger than the others, his presence filling the bay even as he moved with surprising speed, securing restraints and hauling another survivor into position. His tone shifted as he finished, quieter now, almost like a habit rather than a performance. "Through fire and shadow, we endure." The man in front of her, Percival, though she did not yet know his name, gave a single nod at the report, already moving. "Seal it." The ramp slammed shut behind him. The world outside vanished in a burst of light and sound as the dropship lifted hard into the sky, gravity pressing Risa back into the harness. Through the narrow viewport, she caught one last glimpse of Edrian, its violet sky consumed by fire, its towers collapsing into ash. The ship banked sharply, and for the first time since the bombardment began, the noise dulled into something distant, contained. She turned her head slightly, watching the team that had pulled her from the wreckage. They moved with a cohesion she had never seen before, each action flowing into the next, without wasted effort or hesitation. The silent one, Ghost, was already repositioning, scanning angles no one else seemed to notice. The larger man, Preacher, checked the wounded with surprising care, muttering under his breath as if each action carried weight beyond the moment. And the one who had secured her, the one who spoke like the outcome was already decided, moved through the center of it all without raising his voice, yet everything shifted around him. Even at 8 years old, even through shock and grief, she understood something fundamental. This was not a group reacting to chaos, but a team that controlled it. And when the man glanced back once, as if confirming she was still conscious, their eyes met again, and something about that look stayed with her. Not comfort, not fear, but direction, as she realized she had just been pulled from the death of her world by legends. And in the same breath, she had been taken by the Templar Order. There was no ceremony, no question of choice, only assessment, designation, and quiet inevitability. She was identified as viable, processed without delay, and marked for training before the smoke of Adrian had even faded from her skin. Temple Mount did not begin with weapons. It began with control. The years that followed did not break her in the way many assumed they would. They refined her, but the process left marks, some visible, most not. Physically, she became leaner than most of her peers, her movements efficient to the point of seeming effortless, as if she had learned to remove anything unnecessary from her body's responses. She rarely wasted motion, rarely reacted without purpose. Even her breathing had been trained into a quiet, controlled rhythm that did not betray stress or fatigue. But it was the changes that could not be seen that defined her more clearly. She learned early that emotion, if left unstructured, could overwhelm perception. The memory of Adrian, the burning sky, the count that never reached her mother, did not fade. It reorganized. It became something she could step into and out of, something she could hold at a distance without losing its clarity. Where another cadet might have carried fear, she carried awareness. Where another might have hesitated, she calculated. Instructors noted that she did not react to failure the way others did. She did not show frustration, anger, or even disappointment. Instead, she would go still, completely still, replaying events internally with a precision that bordered on detachment. It unsettled some of them at first. It impressed the rest. They began to understand that the same moment that had taken something from her had also given her something else. The ability to remain present when others fractured. She had already experienced the worst kind of loss, the kind that arrived without warning and without mercy. And because of that, nothing in training could truly surprise her anymore. It did not make her fearless. It made her prepared. And over time, that preparation hardened into something stronger than instinct. It became control. Risa learned to regulate her breathing, to silence thought, to interpret the world beyond sight. Instructors quickly realized she did not merely process information, she interpreted instability itself. By 10, she could identify pattern drift faster than senior cadets. By 12, she was predicting battlefield shifts without interface assistance. And by 14, she no longer relied on visual data at all. She did not need to see the battlefield, she could feel it. 6 months after final clearance, Risa stepped onto the bridge of the temple's shield. And this time, it was real. The air carried the sharp scent of ozone and recycled atmosphere, tinged with the faint metallic bite of charge systems. The hum of the ship ran deeper, layered with the weight of active systems and distant engine output, vibrating through her boots and up her spine. And the bridge commander stood at the central station, his posture rigid, but his gaze flicking more frequently than he likely intended, betraying the tension of a crew not yet accustomed to real engagement. "Lieutenant Calder, take the tactical station," he said, his tone controlled but carrying a subtle edge, as if testing whether she would hesitate. She moved into position as the holotable ignited, her hands settling into place with the same controlled precision she had been taught since childhood. For a brief, almost imperceptible moment, as the tactical grid came alive and the pressure of real combat settled over the bridge, that memory surfaced again, her mother running toward the sky, the count of ships rising, the moment everything narrowed to a single, irreversible realization. Her throat tightened, not with fear, but with that same stillness she had learned to live inside. "You're not done yet. Stay with me." The words came back without sound, not as comfort, but as structure. Her breathing steadied instantly, her focus narrowing with surgical clarity as the battlefield resolved before her. Emotion did not rise, it aligned. And as Jakari contacts surged across the display, the pattern revealed itself as different, irregular, adaptive, breathing in unstable pulses, and Risa felt it immediately. "They've changed the pattern," she said after 57 seconds, her voice steady despite the rising tension around her, as other officers began to realize they were already behind the curve. "Confirm," Calder demanded. "No fixed lag," she replied. "They're generating moving kill zones. The center is a trap. Push the upper shear line." The order was given, and the ship drove into the distortion, its hull shuddering as reality bent violently around it. For a moment it should have failed, but it didn't. And they broke through, flanked the lead corvette, and destroyed it in a decisive strike. When it was over, Calder looked at her. "How?" Risa met his gaze, and for a fraction of a second the memory overlapped with the present, the burning sky of Edrian, the dropship ramp closing, the man who had looked at her as if the outcome was already decided. "You're not done yet. Stay with me." "I grew up watching the sky die, sir," she said, her voice steady, her expression unchanged. "The math is louder to me." Later, alone on the bridge, she stood at her station as the ship settled into a steady patrol hum, the aftermath of combat still lingering in the faint heat radiating from the consoles and the residual vibration beneath her feet. And for the first time since the simulation, she allowed herself a brief moment to process what it meant. Not the victory, but the responsibility that came with it. Because out there, beyond the glass, the patterns she felt would no longer be contained to controlled environments. The low vibration of engines and life support threading up through the deck into her boots. The viewport stretched wide before her, a pane of reinforced crystal holding back the cold vastness. And beyond it, the stars burned with a hard, distant clarity. Sharp points of light scattered across a depth that seemed to pull at the eye. The air carried the faint scent of warmed circuitry and filtered metal, the quiet tick of cooling systems marking the end of combat readiness. The stars were not violet anymore, not like Adrian's sky had been, but they were still there, unbroken and indifferent. And in that stillness, she felt both the absence of what had been lost and the weight of what remained. They were still worth protecting. She touched the silver thread at her cuff, her thumb worrying the frayed edge as her grip tightened just enough for the fibers to bite into her skin, a small, grounding pressure that steadied her breath. "The sky remembers every name it loses," she whispered. This time, there was no hesitation as she whispered, "And I intend to make sure it remembers." Her grip tightening around the silver thread, shoulders settling as her breathing steadied into a controlled, deliberate rhythm. Somewhere beyond the patrol lanes, the war was already beginning, and Risa Calder could feel it forming, not as fear or prophecy, but as pressure, as pattern, as the inevitable shift of something vast enough to reshape the stars.